The April 29th, 2015 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the regular meeting, is brought to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Atherton,
Here.
Ruling,
Here.
Kroll,
Here.
Castro,
Here.
Neer,
Here.
Katz,
Here.
Chair Welsh.
Here.
All present?
Okay, the next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to consider the new business item prior to the old business item.
Okay, there's a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, in terms of discussion, the new business item is going to be a very short opening of that, and then probably 2 weeks hence, we'll have that discussion. So rather than have people sit through that, the first item on the agenda will take care of that bit of business and then move forward. Is there any questions on that? Okay, all in favor of amending the agenda to take care of the item 2, new business, prior to old business number 1, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's been passed. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes, and at this point, there are none. We will take care of that in the future. Then we have time for citizen comments. Is there anybody that would like to speak to items not on the agenda tonight? Okay, seeing none, we'll move past that. Leads us to the new business item, public hearing on rezoning request by Dan Sears on behalf of D&J Properties to convert an existing rooming house on 534 College Avenue into single and double occupancy apartments. Do we have some news on that then?
Just that the petitioners asked that this item be continued to May 13th.
Okay,
So staff would ask that you open the public hearing and continue it to
Okay.
date certain that night.
okay. So at this time, I'm going to open the public hearing. Not expecting to have any public hearing, and is there a motion to continue that until, what was the date certain?
May 13th?
May
At 6
13th?
PM.
May 13th at 6 PM. If there's anyone in the audience or listening to this program, that would be the date that they should return to hear more on that public hearing. Any questions? Anything else we need to do on that item?
You need to
We
motion
need
and
to vote.
approve it.
Okay,
Yes,
let's go ahead and vote. You want to do a roll call on that? Or,
not
okay.
necessary.
All in favor of passing the public hearing continuation until May 13th at 6 PM, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Same sign.
For the record, who is the movement and second?
Can I have a motion?
I'll move.
I'll second.
There we
Right.
go.
Now, any discussion on the motion on the table, which I believed was on the table? All right. No discussion. Let's go ahead and have that vote again to continue this until May 13th at 6 PM. The request by Dan Sears on D&J Properties at 534 College Avenue. All in favor of continuing until that time, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, passes. So, the item at hand then is on our old business agenda. Continue consideration on rezoning requests for MRF multifamily property to PDR, Planned Development Residential, and approval of preliminary and final development plans for University Village. Do you want to give us some input on that to start?
We wanted to provide some additional feedback for the Planning and Zoning Commission based on some of the questions that arose at the last meeting. At the outset, we're going to talk about a public housing project in a nearby community. At the last meeting, there were some questions about whether it is possible to serve a community better by integrating it more into the whole of the community rather than having a concentration. And so we looked at what has happened in across the country, and more particularly in Illinois and in northern Illinois. There was formerly a development known as Jericho Circle in the city of Aurora. That was a 13-acre site comprised of 28 buildings with 145 dwelling units, so a density of approximately 11.1 dwelling units per acre. That one development comprised 22% of all the public housing in the city of Aurora. In 2010, HUD, the federal agency, approved demolition of that development. It was owned by the Aurora Housing Authority, and the Housing Authority came in with a redevelopment plan where they said, we would like to demolish this and replace it with 119 units of mixed-income dwelling units, with some of those 119 to be built at Jericho Circle and some to be built off-site at alternate locations. That was a reduction in density of 26 units, or about 18%. HUD approved that redevelopment plan and indicated that it was consistent with the recommended practice of de-densifying affordable housing developments and integrating them into the community. However, after the plan was approved and the city completed the demolition, and again, this was a Aurora Housing Authority owned project, so a publicly owned project, not a privately owned project. After it was approved, the city of Aurora appointed alternate members to the Aurora Housing Authority board, and the new board determined that proceeding forward with that redevelopment plan wasn't in the city's best interest. So they proposed to not follow that project. They had filed for a low-income housing tax credit application, a mechanism of financing that's similar to some of the things that have been proposed by Security Properties. That application was withdrawn, and they said instead they were going to build an alternate development, mixed income, without an affordable housing designation. One of the displaced residents who had lived at this development when it was constructed filed a claim with HUD, claiming that the Aurora Housing Authority's actions violated the Fair Housing Act and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and Section 504 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act. Ultimately, in 2014, so a little less than a year ago, the city of Aurora and the Aurora Housing Authority and HUD entered into a settlement agreement, and the terms of that settlement agreement were as follows. In lieu of the 145 units of affordable housing that had existed on the Jericho Circle site, the city agreed that it would develop 100 units of affordable housing. And by affordable housing, we mean housing where the family income is less than 80% of the area median income, and where the rent is less than 30% of each family's household income, and where the leases were subject to affordable housing restrictions. So general affordable housing, not necessarily within a subclass of being Section 8 or being a certain type of affordable housing. So going from 145 units to 100 units was a 32% reduction in density. The agreement required that those units be developed over a 5-year period, either at Jericho Circle or at any other location within the corporate limits of the city of Aurora. So the city could find and construct affordable housing at either on a site-by-site individual unit basis or in other developments across the city over a 5-year period. And at the conclusion of the 5 years, any of the 100 units that hadn't been constructed would be required to be built at the Jericho Circle development. Former residents of Jericho Circle were given a priority application status for applying for the affordable housing that was to be constructed. The other aspect of this is that the Housing Authority had separately previously filed and been approved for a separate low-income housing tax credit application and grant, where they had agreed to build 40 affordable housing units at some location in the city. And HUD indicated that Aurora could use those 40 units that it had already agreed to build towards the 100 that it had to build to replace the 145 that had been demolished. So 40 units the city was already contractually agreed to build, ended up counting towards the 100 that they had to build under this consent agreement. So this represents an example of a circumstance where a public housing development was redeveloped and is currently in the process of being redeveloped, and where the settlement agreement that HUD approved contemplated de-densification and spreading the affected affordable housing units over a broader area to afford better access to services, better access to jobs, better access to some of the amenities that have been at issue at times during the public hearing. I would turn it over to Planner Highland to address some similar comments, and then I'll come back in just a minute.
So what you've heard about is one situation in Aurora where de-densification and decentralization efforts have occurred. The Chicago Housing Authority and other areas around the country, Los Angeles, New York City, you name the city, USA, over the past 20 years, transitioned many well-known developments from large, densely populated, affordable housing complexes to more decentralized, mixed-income developments. Similar redevelopment has happened in other major cities as well. Of note, those redevelopments are public housing authorities that have undertaken redevelopment, but also introduced and supported the Choice Neighborhoods Program and grant in 2009. The city of DeKalb unsuccessfully applied for these grant opportunities. The basic premise of the Choice Grant Program, according to HUD, is as follows. It focuses on 3 core goals, first being housing. And their housing core is to replace distressed public and assisted housing with high-quality, mixed-income housing that is well-managed and responsive to the needs of the surrounding neighborhood. The second core goal is people, to improve educational outcomes and intergenerational mobility for youth with services and supports delivered directly to youth and their families. And lastly, the third core is the neighborhood, to create the conditions necessary for public and private reinvestment in distressed neighborhoods to offer the kinds of amenities and assets, including safety, good schools, and commercial activity that are important to family choices about their community. The Choice Program recognizes that improving conditions within affordable housing developments requires making changes to the entire neighborhood to provide the social services, jobs, and transportation that residents need. Of note, these previous efforts to take high-density public and assisted housing projects and convert them to better integrated mixed-income developments with improved access to schools, jobs, transportation, and community services have been programs aimed at integration rather than displacement.
As we look at the project that's before us, again, we return back to some of the comments that have come up at previous meetings, and as staff, we feel it's incumbent upon us to note that the question before the Planning and Zoning Commission to make a recommendation, and ultimately the question before the City Council on the rezoning, isn't a question that limits or alters the current use of the property. The property is currently permitted to be maintained as affordable housing in perpetuity. There is no outcome from the current question before the city that either requires it to be discontinued from use as affordable housing, that changes its status as being eligible to be continued to be used as affordable housing. In more simple language, if the Plan Commission recommended denial, that would not equal terminating the existing use or limiting the existing legal nonconforming use. On the inverse side of that, if the Plan Commission recommends approval, that doesn't guarantee that the property continues to be used as affordable housing. There is not a component of the zoning question that's before the city that, and frankly, the city does not have the authority to either mandate or prohibit continuing use of the property as affordable housing. So the question that's before you is whether the legal nonconforming use relating to density and the exemptions that have been identified should be converted to a conforming use, a planned unit development for residential development.
Question.
Yes.
You just made a statement that said that it's not, that we won't be deciding tonight on whether it continues to be an affordable housing project. But doesn't the financing that drives their request require that this will be affordable housing for the next 40 years if they get that loan? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Security Properties has provided the city, and we've provided to the Plan Commission. I should have noted before, we provided you with a copy of the settlement agreement between the City of Aurora Housing Authority, and HUD. We've also provided you with copies of the, they're called LIPRA agreements, Low Income Housing Preservation and Resident Home Ownership Act agreements relating to Phase 1 and Phase 2 of University Village. Those agreements between the property owners or property mortgagees and HUD are what ultimately impose the use restrictions that say the property is required or isn't required to be maintained as affordable housing. And that's a question separate from our zoning, but Chair, you correctly note the zoning would make the property eligible for the financing that the redevelopers are seeking.
Which would include those same requirements, correct?
It would. Under the LIPRA agreements, the development is required to be maintained as affordable housing for the remaining useful life of the development. And remaining useful life is defined as the period during which the physical characteristics of the property remain in a condition suitable for occupancy, assuming normal maintenance and repairs are made, and major systems and capital components are replaced as become necessary. So as the LIPRA agreements are drafted, what they contemplate is that for a period of at least 50 years after they're entered into, the owner doesn't have the ability to go to HUD and say the buildings can no longer be used. After that 50-year threshold is met, then the owners can come and can attempt to prove to HUD that the buildings are beyond their useful life and they should no longer be held to a use restriction. We have found it is possible. The other way to terminate a LIPRA agreement is by mutual agreement with HUD. If HUD agrees that redevelopment is appropriate, they can agree with a party to mutually terminate the agreement and replace it with an alternate form of development. It appears as though that has happened on occasion where a development is replaced with an alternate development that doesn't displace residents and that affords affordable housing over the basis of the community. So, yes, to your question, the zoning that is contemplated before us is required for the refinancing that would enable a new LIPRA agreement to be entered and the prospective purchasers to buy the property and undertake their redevelopment agreement. Regardless of whether the city approves the rezoning request or not, though, the existing LIPRA agreements are in effect. They're not something that the city enforces. They're not something the city has the ability to terminate or take any action relative to. Those are between the property owners and HUD. And the circumstances under which those would remain in effect or terminate are solely between the property owners and HUD.
Well, let me extend that, and excuse me for interrupting, but that was kind of the middle of where we needed to be, I think. You presented earlier a case study of a place that said, gee, we should forego the LIPRA agreements. I mean, that really was what was negotiated with HUD in Aurora, is that correct?
The financing that was in place in Aurora, there were a couple different types of financing, but ultimately all of those were, all of the use agreements that were in effect were terminated when HUD approved the redevelopment that contemplated demolishing the 145 units and that ended up several years culminating in the agreement to build 100 replacement units across the city.
And I don't think anybody in the room tonight is suggesting that these units should be torn down.
No, and again, the city doesn't have the authority to.
Nor do we want to.
Right.
Now, however, I'm not sure that we're all in favor of signing a new agreement. We're at that 50-year threshold, pretty much. You said it was a 50-year threshold that we could stop and say, you know, this doesn't fit the situation now. The property doesn't fit, it's run down, or whatever we would want to say. I don't know what we would want to say, okay? But if we move forward tonight, grant this request so that they can get that financing, I would suggest that we were at a much less likely position to go to HUD for the next 20 years. We're at the 50 years. If we suggest that we ought to go get a whole lot more money from HUD, it would seem to me like 20 is a short period of time. It might be another 50 before we get to stop, look at the situation and say, is this the best for the tenants and for the community?
So one point to note, while the development was built over a period of time and parts of it are several decades old, over the past intervening decades, the property owners have entered into new and updated LIPRA agreements with HUD. So the existing LIPRA agreements have different terms. Those are before you, but some of them extend at present to 2040. So the existing LIPR agreements, some of them have remaining terms on them. But I would concur with your assessment that if the property is refinanced and redeveloped in the fashion that the applicants are proposing, that likely extends the period of time. It would likely result in new LIPR agreements and a renewal of that 50-year term.
Which would be 30 years longer than if we sat with where we are approximately. I mean, there's a big difference in those time. Okay. Forgive me for interrupting. Continue with what you were presenting.
Where we would go from there is, again, back to the central question that's before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that is the question of whether the rezoning that is before you is appropriate. In the absence of the LIPR agreements, in the absence of Phase 3 is subject to what's known as a HAP agreement, an alternate form of financing right now. In the absence of the refinancing and the extension of agreements that maintain the use of the property as it sits today could be used as affordable housing or not, with the 18 dwelling units per acre that are there as a legal non-conforming use. If it is rezoned to a PUDR, it could be used in that fashion as affordable housing or not in perpetuity as a permitted use. Again, it's worth acknowledging, and we've spent some time talking about the fact that the federal government has agreements that relate to the use of the property, and those are in effect, and we don't have any basis to suspect that those are going to be terminated or that there is alternate development, and that's not the question that's before us. But that brings us to the other sheet that is before the Planning and Zoning Commission. We've provided you with the LaSalle factors again, which are factors that they've been evaluated and modified by the courts over years, but these are kind of the core factors that are at issue when a rezoning request is made. Those were discussed in the staff memo at the last meeting. They've been discussed by the Planning and Zoning Commission before. We would note that the property isn't vacant, so the 8th factor is not applicable, but questions relating to the use of the property, the propriety of that use, the impact upon property values, hardships that are created based upon the zoning of the property or rezoning, the public need for the proposed use, and the thoroughness with which the city has planned and zoned its land use. And on point 7, the thoroughness with which the land use has been planned, the staff memo from your last meeting went into detail regarding how the city's land use planning evolved over a period of several decades, and Chair Welsh commented on that at length as well, how that process evolved and how the current regulations came into place. We would suggest that those factors would need to be measured against, the 7 waivers that University Village is seeking with regard to their proposed redevelopment, and those are also outlined here. To enable the reason that this is before you as a planned unit development is because it doesn't fit within the ordinary zoning standards that the city has. That is why it is a legal non-conforming use. So to make this a planned unit development and to codify and approve that zoning, these 7 factors would be deviations from the standards that have evolved over the past several decades. So our recommendation to you is that you evaluate those requested waivers and the LaSalle factors as they apply to the property, and consider the testimony that's been presented to you and the backup information that's been presented to you as you make your determination regarding the appropriate recommendation this evening.
Okay. Is that the terminus of the staff report? All right. I'm interested in the case study in Aurora. Like any case study, you have to find the things that help us make decisions. And I think a whole lot of it they tore this thing down and then come back, years later, and it being a public body tends to kind of diffuse the key facts that probably are in there. We just got those pieces of information prior to the meeting starting, and they're pretty voluminous. It concerns me that the body hasn't actually looked at these things, so that may become an issue later in the meeting. You know, I guess I would start the discussion today with describing a number of things that have been said privately and publicly about what we're really deciding tonight, okay? I think there was an editorial in the Chronicle, I'll lean on that first, that was supporting lowering the density of this property. That's really not what we're voting on. You know, the allowed density changed 20 or so years ago. This piece of property was grandfathered in. That's a fair way to deal with people who've made an investment in the community under the current standards, to allow them to continue to use their property in those same ways. I was going to say in perpetuity, but, you know, it's been defined legally that there's some point at which it might be 50 years, it might be 17 years, it might be 150 years. There's some point at which the value changes and maybe they don't have that right anymore. But it's a right that they have, the owners of this property have, to have 18 units per acre right now. We're not voting on that. It's not changing, okay? What's being discussed, what they're asking for, in probably the most important piece of the 7 areas that they want waivers, is to say, well, if it burns down or if a tornado comes and knocks down a segment of that building, we want to guarantee now, right now, that we have the right to put all those units back up exactly as they have. Well, later in the meeting last week or 2 weeks ago, we were discussing that issue. I guess I'm going to step back and say, they, you know, at the time that happens, and we just watched one happen, okay? You know, a tornado took a community practically out. At that point, it's a good question. It's an important question. Can we rebuild this the way it is, okay? And I would hypothesize that just as we're giving all sorts of favorables to Fairdale, that people would try and help then too. But it wouldn't be the city of DeKalb that's evicting people. It would be a tornado that evicted people. It wouldn't be something that people could live there. So at that point, we would make that decision. How do we want to rebuild that part of our community? The reason that it's important today, and to me this is the issue, the reason it's important today is we have a group that is a very professional group that is very prepared to make this Section 8 or some other affordable housing locked in for the next 40 or 50 years. Now, I've described the fact that this was affordable housing when it was built, but it wasn't. It was more diverse. It was more able to change with the needs of the community. It concerns me a great deal when we let the federal government lock that, whether it's HUD or somebody else. We're kind of at a crossroads where we can say, yeah, you can go get free money and you can do this thing again. And the phrase that people have used on me recently is, you know, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result. You know, I'm happy to hear that some of the deferred maintenance that should have happened years ago is going to be improved. And I think the residents are happy to hear that. I think they're going to have to be improved anyway, and the The city, I believe, is prepared to do that on a number of items, whether there's a new owner or not. And whoever's the owner is going to have to make sure that those have to come up to standards. And otherwise, people will move out if it's really, continues to go down. But the change is being requested for the financing. And very few times have we ever listened to a request for a project and say, well, we'll change all of our rules, big rules, so that you get financing cheaper. And I think that's part of the reaction from some of the construction industry is, well, I could do a lot better if I had 18 units per acre. Yeah, but the community wouldn't be better. That's what we decided a long time ago. So we're not voting to evict anyone or not evicting anyone. That's not even on the table. We're not voting whether this could continue to be the same density as it is tonight. Those aren't the issues. The issues are we fair to everyone that comes before this body, that we say 12 units works, not only for this community, but for a lot of the communities in the country. That's how we ended up with the 12 units. If we make it too dense, if we don't keep this thing up, yeah, that creates problems. But we're not saying that it has to change in density. We're saying, are we going to allow this property to evolve into what's best for the tenants and best for the community over the next 20 years? Or we're going to lock in into something that it sounds like people, residents are concerned about, that it's too, structured and the manager is an out-of-town community, out of town and those kinds of things. I just want to make sure that nobody goes away, however we vote, thinking that anything's changing tonight. And I would hope, and I suggested that 2 weeks ago, that if we're not willing to make those changes for this financing for this company, that this company, and I suggested it 2 weeks ago so that maybe they could come back tonight, has come up with a different financing that allows the property to evolve into what it can be with the help of this community. Having said all that, I'm opening up for other statements and comments.
Just to add to Mike's statement is, my concern is, are we making a deal for a short-term fix and, long-term, are we locking into something that as a community, we don't, 40 years from now, won't be a good decision looking back. So, it's a tough decision.
Who else?
I'm the master of repetition, and yes, this is a difficult decision for all the reasons that have been put forward. The short term and the long term is that distinction what makes all the difference here. As I see this, and I'm highlighting just a few of the things that have come up in our packet. By the way, I do read these things, and I want to one more time repeat that I'm all equally concerned that we got this today. I have not read this paperwork. But highlighting just a few of the things that come to mind as I reflect on this. On a per dwelling unit basis, most type 1 and type 2 crimes in University Village are higher than relative to the rest of the city. On a per calls per dwelling unit basis, recent fire calls from University Village are higher relative to the rest of the city. We have had a parade of complaints from University Village residents regarding the living conditions and the overall attention of the current management to these conditions. This commission has not had a chance to witness these conditions directly, but in the absence of an alternate testimony from, for example, the current management providing a different perspective, I suspect that we're left with no other option but to believe that the conditions are, at a minimum, undesirable. So where we find ourselves is that the commission and the city has a proposal from Security Properties to purchase and invest in University Village. It sounds as if the investment to go through, variances in the city code are being requested for the rezoning to take place. Please correct me if I'm mistaken in any of that statement. Of the 7 variances that are requested, density, measured in units per acre, and number of parking spaces have been the most discussed items. I have a very specific and direct question for a representative of police, a representative from the fire department, and/or the city manager, and/or any staff representative. And the question is, do you believe that if these plans were to be approved by city council and the negotiated changes in items that have to do with fire, police, and well-being of the community were to be implemented, the resulting fire safety, police security, and overall well-being of the community would improve in a significant way?
Who first?
There's not a big line of people jumping up to answer that one, so I will take a swing at it. At the outset, we have to acknowledge that the city, through the zoning process, doesn't have the ability to have input on who the manager is or what their management practices are. And you'll note that none of the development conditions that are proposed relate to the management of the property or the identification of the property manager. With regard to your question on whether the items that have been put forward would have a meaningful impact, I see the fire chief going over by the podium, and I'm going to defer to him. As we looked at this, we tried to put together a list that we felt could be accomplished and that would have an impact upon the property in a beneficial way. The exact scope of that or the measure of that, the objective measure of it, I'm not sure we can put a number on.
Good evening. As the city attorney said, I don't think we can measure that of the scope that we've added, but I think you've added a great fire protection to that building. There's going to be 3 different phases. Each phase is going to have an upgraded protection stance. Phase 1 and 2 will have an upgraded alarm system, and phase 3 will also have an upgraded alarm system. And your townhouses are also going to have interconnected smoke detectors added to them, which they currently do not have. Also, you're going to be getting some what's called fire stops, and those will be added to the hood systems. The majority of the fires that we do have are cooking fires, and it's going to greatly enhance that. Like I say, we can't measure that because we haven't had those systems in place, but it will greatly enhance the fire protection.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have other questions?
I have other things to say.
Have at it.
Right? So, forward-looking plans at the national level is the de-densification of or net reduction in affordable housing density. And I quote from our own paperwork here, this proposal will bring the number of subsidized units to 100% of the property from the current ratio of 87% subsidized, 13% market rate. And though housing policy is not addressing a zoning question, in other words, it's not our question, decentralization of subsidized housing in large cities across the country speak to the idea that this is not a good policy and is echoed at the NIU, in the NIU data. I'm going to close the quote at that point. As part of our package, we also have a lot of support from Daniel Burke, Director, Chicago Multifamily HUD for the Security Properties Investment Plan in University Village. If I'm not mistaken, that letter is from 9 months ago or so. Has that changed in any form or fashion? No. Thank you. So when combined, these 2 points imply that there are no specific short-term plans at the federal level to invest in University Village and address the current problems we face. In fact, Security Property seems to be the plan. That's it, or that is in place as of right now. and that is being presented to us. An argument has been developed by developers. If the variances of a unit density is granted, every other developer in town will ask for a similar variance. The commission and the city may have been unfair to previous petitions for similar variances and would be establishing a precedent for similar variances in the future. This argument is not the sole concern of developers. It is a concern of all citizens. The city of DeKalb has determined the 12 unit per acre density limit is an expression of a desire to reduce overall population density, not only in University Village, but across the entire city. I'm just stating what I think are some obvious things that we have been dealing with, and I would stop at this point and let others comment.
Thank you for asking the question about the fire and police, because that has been on my mind as well, and I was going to ask a similar question this evening. And I'll just reiterate, this is a tough decision for us, for me. We've heard a lot of good things, we've heard a lot of bad things, we've heard some interesting things, but I do want to comment, in my thinking over the last 2 weeks, it's been interesting that there have been no citizens from that neighborhood area that have commented at all. I've heard individual comments from people that I know that live in those areas, and you know, it's projected in the community how University Village is, and it's a projection. I've actually been in a few of the residences several years ago. Probably 5-6 years ago, actually. So that's excuse me, has weighed in on my thoughts, that the very people in the area that comment about how horrible, and that's the words that they use, how horrible University Village is, have not made any comments to us. And I just needed to make that statement. We do have, you know, that's not part of what should be weighing, it's not part of what we should be weighing, but I find that very interesting. There are a lot of improvements that are needed, and this could be very favorable. But I have weighed back and forth about the dwelling units per acre as well. That's, I think, the most difficult piece for me.
Okay, people that haven't spoken at all, just to get people on the table.
Just a few short things. Most of what could have been said has been. I did appreciate your opening comments, Mike, with trying to clarify some of the things that have been swirling rumor-wise about what's going to happen in light of yay or nay tonight. Everyone's has 18 apartments, on here. 18 apartments are going to be there, yay or nay. The issue is that in light of the type of the federal financing that would be required to do these $18 million of much-needed renovations to this area, I have been in University Village and I have seen it, and the efforts of the petitioners have been commendable, to say the least. And I have gone out and solicited a lot of input from a lot of folks, and everyone agrees with those comments, but everyone also agrees to a certain other aspect of it. Not just the precedent that it sets for future low-income housing that would be developed and petitioning for 18 units over the original 12 in light of moving to that to get federally subsidized dollars if we would find ourselves in that situation. But it does lock us into this idea that for the next several years, we are going to be in a inability to decentralize this population to spread them further across DeKalb. And everyone's used the word difficult. I'll use the word torturous for this decision, because I've seen just how much this work is needed and how excellent it's been done, but the precedent that it sets for future decisions is horrendous. And yes, it's unique because of the specificity of University Village, but it's unique today. And that's the hardest part of thinking about this long term. So, yeah. I'm done.
I would agree with actually everything that's been said. I mean, I think that from the standpoint of the improvements that it's making for the tenants, they're not only needed improvements, but they're good improvements. We've heard from the Tenants Association, we've heard from most of the residents that support this development and all the improvements that would be going into it. And, I think there's a lot to be commended on what kind of quality you're trying to establish for these residents. That's the plus side. And that's the side that I think we all want to see. However, at the same time, I don't think that I think we'd be remiss if we ignored that elephant in the room of what kind of precedent it sets. I'm looking at a list and some of the background material that we got of different multifamily residential developments in DeKalb, and I'm seeing over 20 of them with more than 12 units per acre. So it concerns me if this is allowed to take place. Is this going to be a domino effect and a snowball rolling down the hill that we can't stop? And therefore, are we diminishing the quality of the community and perhaps even the quality of the residential areas and the people with them by putting lots of people in a small area? I do have a huge concern about that. I have a concern, my two biggest concerns is that and the parking requirement. And I think the parking is certainly on a lower scale of concern, but is there nonetheless.
Again, for the general public, the device that we're discussing is a planned unit development. Currently, that if somebody wanted a planned unit development today, there is negotiations on both sides for, you're going to, instead of some of these things, you're going to have more trees, or you're going to cover the 2 missing parking places with these things. So there's some give and take because every piece of property, is a little bit different. I think what scares me is that all the things that they're not meeting the requirements for, we're just supposed to waive. And the big ones, the parking and the lot size. I have only once in the last 8 years voted to allow someone not to have enough parking. In fact, we've made people buy theater parking lots, or, there's all sorts of really creative, ways that people have gotten to the numbers, because it's important that when somebody shows back up at their home at 6 o'clock, that they have a place to park that's theirs, okay? We waived it at the plaza because they're changing the uses, and we haven't seen yet what that means, okay? We're told that the number of parking places is adequate for the residents today. Well, that may very well be. May very well be. A 3-car family isn't, what subsidized housing ought to be dealing with. Maybe there's a lot of people that don't have a car at all. That's correct. But again, we're locking, if we allow these things, we're locking into the concept that that's what that piece of property is always going to be like. I don't buy into that. I say people, whether they, need public housing or not, need a quality place to live consistently, okay? the things that are being offered to the residents of this development, and we listened to that for at least 2 meetings. It doesn't pertain to us, but, you know, the new range and redoing these things, those are things that are gonna last for 3, 5, maybe 10 years. This reminds me a lot of when people would come to us and want a lot of money to build a mall in DeKalb. And a lot of communities anteed up that lot of money. And 15 years later, somebody's come back to remodel that mall, and they need a lot more money, okay? You know, some of these things are gonna fall off the face of the earth much sooner than what we're giving. And the rest, we're giving in. And, you know, Mayor Bessie's in the room, so I'm gonna go back to what I heard her say over and over again in the 12 or 20 years that we worked together, was, does that set a precedent? What does this mean for the next guy? And I've been here for the period of time where it meant long meetings for over and over again saying, we can't make any money at 15 units, let alone 12. We can't make any money on 13 units, let alone 12. We're not going to do this project unless you allow us to do this. You know, again, if we were talking a couple of parking spaces, or we were talking a few more units being allowed to be on this property, it's 50% more. 50% more than what we have said is the proper amount for the last 20 years. And what drives that? Not that anybody's going to be changed or evicted or that anybody wants that to happen, but that our bonds that we're going to sell, the federal government is going to sell to finance our near 0% money, okay, require that they be paid. And we can't, you know, I asked the question last time, you know, can't you just get some insurance that will pay the difference in the interim? No. You know, that's not the way that this program of financing works. There's a lot of things that it does do, it locks us into, but that's not allowed. You got to do it this way for this financing. And my question last week was, well, is there other financing you can get that would allow you over time to flex into where this very nicely located piece of property, you know, it's in the heart of just north of the university, and it's a very valuable property. It's a valuable property that may be overvalued if you say it doesn't cost anything to do this because we're going to go get this free money. And to me, that's what we're voting on, whether we buy into that concept of we'll give you the short-term fix, and we'll need a new refrigerator and new gutters and new well before all that money's gone.
Chair Welch,
Please.
if I may.
Please.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate on this argument, and I'm going to play devil's advocate on any argument because the truth is that it's on both sides. So the question I have in face of your arguments is, what is the alternative? And unfortunately, you know, I see the 12 unit per acre limitation as, and this is code, by the way, this is city code. I see it as a desire of what we want, and we apply it as consistently as we can once we establish it. But, you know, I mean, the question that I have right now is, well, if we reject this, then what is the alternative? And the alternative is the status quo, or the study quorum, which will be more appropriate to use. I don't think, you know, as Ms. Atherton mentioned a moment ago, I didn't hear anybody from the surrounding area. I didn't hear anybody from the current management, and all I heard were quite a number of complaints. And what I mentioned earlier, and I say again, is there was, you know, as a commission, we didn't go to University Village to see what the conditions were. With the testimony that I have in front of me, I have no reason to believe that the opposite is true. I have every reason to believe that the situation is not positive. So fine, we stick to our guns here in 12 units per acre, and then we are going to then spend the next 30, 40 years in the current situation. And I don't live there. So I make the decision, and I'm going to ask the residents of University Village to carry that burden on their shoulders for the next 30, 40 years. I don't have another, I mean, if there is a realistic alternative to what we have now, I want to hear it. A realistic alternative.
Well, last meeting, I think I asked, someone asked, you know, how many other people were bidding on the ownership of this property?
Yes.
And I think the number was in the range of 30, okay? Those are, I don't know who those people are, but they're 30 people who were prepared to desire to own this property. Maybe they were better financed so that they don't require zero money. Maybe not. I'm not ready to jump to that 30 people yet, because I turn to this group and say, you're a great bunch of people. You know all the rules and regulations. Find, look for, be creative, a different way to do this project that does not handcuff us to 50 more years. Okay? Because you've spent the time on this. At the same time, the city of DeKalb has spent a lot of time discussing, studying. That's not wasted time either. We now know most of the facts. Some of those things, no matter how we vote tonight, or if we defer and wait 2 weeks and vote then, the city of DeKalb, I'm confident, is prepared to go fix some, or have fixed, required to be fixed, however, whatever it takes, to make sure that the fire code and the drywall in the ceiling that's been pounded out either by a resident or by maintenance people to get a pipe to another area, you know, those things need to be fixed today. Okay? I can only, you know, I fall back on the concept of, we had people from McDonald's here that came to us and said, this doesn't fit our current theory of how we're going to sell hamburgers. And we looked at their designs and said, this doesn't fit DeKalb. And we sent them away. They were back. Somebody was back. You know, it might have been Burger King the next time, but McDonald's came back because it was a really great place to be. And they wanted to be that same spot. And several other times, we sent them away because it didn't fit our code, it didn't fit the spot, and it wasn't going to work as well as a better plan. And I don't want to sound like every project ought to be sent away. We've had some people who claim we should have sent some away quicker. But this group it doesn't get to listen to whether you get a new range. That's not within really our purview. We have a code that says this is how building is going to be properly structured in the city of DeKalb. And we need to interpret that. And there's some deviation possibilities here with this PUD. But do we throw out 20 years of progress?
Or seal the present time for 20 years.
Or say, come back with another plan, and if this group doesn't plan to do that, the owner either decides to make the improvements to continue to own it, or turns to another group. That another group probably didn't offer as much as this group. But when you get 0% money because you get to change it any way you want and guarantee 50 more years of that in perpetuity, then maybe they overbid. I can't decide because it's not within my purview. I don't have the facts. I'm just conjecturing. But it's not our responsibility to pump up the price by cheapening the quality of our housing in DeKalb. And again, we're not even suggesting we're going to tear anything down. We're just saying to everybody that's looked at this for the last 20 years, we still believe that. It's not, they're not asking for 12 and a half units, they're not asking for 13 units, they're asking for 50% more units guaranteed. And when last week, 2 weeks ago, they asked, well, maybe we could do this as a side letter, the city turned that down pretty quickly. It didn't take more than 30 seconds. No. Why should we cheapen the lives of these people? It just doesn't make sense to me. And I guess I appreciate that everybody comes with a different perspective, but this is not a difficult decision for me. The long term is what I'm looking for. The plan is what I'm looking for. You know, what's it going to be like 6 weeks from now? I can't guarantee that that was going to change either way. I mean, these people are asking for these things, and then they probably will buy the property. I mean, it's all on, if we can get the best deal, we can do that. I'm willing to be flexible, but 50% more units guaranteed, and the ramifications of that do not make sense to me. I don't think they make sense to the city of DeKalb. And by that, I mean the community of DeKalb, both the residents inside. No, it's not, you know, and I'm not the guy who suggests we ought to put a fence up. It's part of DeKalb. And I want it to be the best part of DeKalb that it can be. And I don't hear it. Who else hasn't spoken?
There's been a lot of talk about the density of the dwellings, and it's at 17.99 per acre now. And the only time that's going to change would be in the event that the buildings are burned down or taken down by a tornado. And at that point, if the variance is not given, the population density of the dwellings would have to go down to 12. However, if we grant this variance, then the proposal would allow them to keep it at 18. Some other things that would be affected beyond that, the principal building setbacks. The setbacks required for the development are met on frontage of public road, but not all interior roadways. The UDO requires that front and side yard setbacks of 25 feet from any row and front line, and a side rear setback of 5 to 35 feet respectively. The University Village development would require that the site plan presented be approved to allow for the existing building locations, bringing the legally non-conforming status in conformity with the zoning ordinances. So, you know, we're not only looking at the density, we're also looking at items such as that. Signage is another one. The number and size of the signs that are out there right now are, they've got 5 ground signs that are 40-foot square feet, and they're 6 foot tall, and they're located at each entryway. and entrance from the right-of-way. The UDO allows only one ground sign. It shall not exceed 6 square feet or 6 feet in height.
Okay.
Yeah, and the parking ratio, the code says that there should be one parking space per bedroom plus a half a space per unit. The property has within it 1,004 bedrooms, and they're in 534 units. Therefore, the total number of required parking spaces for the development equals 1,271 parking spaces. The development has 795 spaces. So, we're asked to overlook this one also.
Anything else, Roger?
Yeah, that's all I have.
Okay. Anybody else, were you holding back on your feelings on something, David?
No.
Yeah.
No,
I'll wait.
okay. I just want to make sure that everybody, at this juncture, I guess I'm going to ask the question. There are some important documents that we just got, which says this is the kind of agreement that's going to be signed for this property, not by us, but by, and maybe this isn't exactly what it ought to look like, but I would be remiss if I didn't look at this, I'm suggesting, prior to really voting on this project. Again, I don't know that I believe that all the issues that were described in Aurora are pertinent, but there are some pertinent things there, and I think one of the things that's pertinent is, if you do it wrong, we end up in court for a long time. I take out of that. I don't think we're doing it wrong. But, here's not the way to do it, and end up negotiating for the next 5 years.
Mr.
yes.
Chair, I just wanted to add,
Yeah.
we certainly understand that, and it's not our preference to provide documents to you at the meeting. As staff, we've been working with the petitioner to try and find out information on the underlying development restrictions for the past many months. And the LIPRA agreements were not provided until Monday afternoon. So it was too late for inclusion in the packet and distribution to the public. And so we wanted to ensure that they were before you, and we tried to summarize and encapsulate for your benefit and for the public benefit what they include. But we apologize for not having them sooner and being able to provide them sooner.
And I'm not complaining. I mean, the information comes when it comes. And to me, the LIPR agreement is really part of the hinge here. What we're trying to do for this development allows for them to sign a LIPR agreement. Well, gee, it's interesting then what a LIPR agreement says. And I think the community might be interested in that. But, my understanding is that in perpetuity is tossed around easily. And yet, I understand through this other that negotiating out of where you are is possible, and it's most possible, my belief is it's most possible now. I mean, this is turning the corner for the next 50 years. Hopefully you want to be here 50 years, okay? And how we do that is important. I think it's one of the most important things that this group has talked about in the last 3 or 4 years. And whether there's a great deal of public that wants to come and speak, at the podium, it is a major topic for the community. So, I know how I'm going to vote. I'm always willing to listen to some more, but I think this is going to support the feeling that there's a lot more to this. And maybe people are going to, you know, the $24 that bought Manhattan Island, okay? Maybe what we look at New Ranges as. I mean, I know that it was a great marketing and a great gather the residents, you know, of saying, well, here, we'll do this, this, and this. I believe in, we got a letter this week in terms of some of the social programs and other things that people are focusing in on this development, you know, and hopefully other areas in that area. This is not the only development that is of concern to people. But, and I support those. But again, nobody's saying those programs are there for the next 10 years, or 20 years, or 50 years, okay? I hope that the residents there are here 50 years from now, as I am, when that, you know, development started. But I hope it's there for the good of the community, for the good of those residents. So my question is, you know, does this group want to look at these pertinent pieces of data? Or would you prefer to continue debate and come to an absolute answer tonight?
Just a clarification, since we now seem to be focusing a lot on the LIPRA agreement. Mr. Attorney, you had made a comment that you think that the current agreement has already been re-signed or put forth now, at least probably till 2040, as far as you know?
The agreements that are before you were updated agreements that were re-entered into by the current owners, and that do have a term that extends out to approximately 2040
Okay,
for
thank
two of the phases. The third phase is subject to,
you. To
again,
re-upping.
that it's subject to a HAP agreement. It's a different type of financing. There are some slightly different use restrictions applicable to that. And the extent to which the Planning and Zoning Commission is focusing on that question,
Right.
going back to our factors, one of the factors is the suitability of the property for the zoned purpose, or the suitability of the property for the purpose that zoning is sought for. And certainly to the extent that there are independent restrictions that require the property to be used for a certain purpose or not, those are relevant considerations for the Planning and Zoning Commission to engage in. And certainly, as the chair indicated, a LIPR agreement is an agreement that fundamentally can be amended or can be terminated by agreement of the parties. There are circumstances where that has happened, but the only circumstances we're aware of that happening in are circumstances where there's an orderly process for reinvesting and redeveloping the property, and for ensuring that individuals aren't displaced, but that they're reintegrated into the community in a fashion that's consistent with some of the HUD policy goals that Planner Highland talked about.
And as well, because I do know a little bit about HUD and some of their programs and such, they also could come back and pull the agreement as well. If some freak reason they ran out of funds or something came about, they also can pull the agreement or change the agreement as well, correct?
They can. There are circumstances where, based on, I'm not aware of it ever happening relative to changes in funding, but changes in the property can necessitate a change in the agreement. It could be possible that a property would no longer be suitable for the intended purpose in a shorter period of time. And we're aware of anecdotally of that happening, but yes, that is possible.
Thank you.
So, back to my pro-offered question was, do people need to study these more? Or proceed?
I may lack imagination on my side, but as of right now, with the discussion that has taken place right now, I cannot imagine how any more reading will change my mind about what is going on here.
Okay.
That's my position on that.
I appreciate that. Others?
If nothing else, I appreciate you putting out the idea to defer to at least consider examining this for another 2 weeks, but I'm not sure,
Okay.
given discussions.
I don't hear the need. No one has voiced that besides myself.
Not good.
Okay, let's continue then. With that direction, we are going to eventually need a motion. This body always creates a motion in the affirmative. And so the motion is going to be confirming some kind of agreement toward what a PUD would look like. And then if, the body of this group decides to not want to go that direction, they would vote no. But the motion has to be a positive one. Am I correct in that regard? I'm sorry. That this needs to be a positive statement?
I was just having a
Okay.
sidebar with the principal planner regarding that.
Okay. Do you want more time for that, or? That's fine.
I'm not certain if that is a
Requirement.
city-specific indication. That there are certainly planning and zoning commissions that make positive or negative recommendations, a recommendation to either approve or to recommend denial of a petition.
I'm willing to do either.
I'm not aware of a
Sometimes it
reason.
gets convoluted if we,
Yeah.
so what you're suggesting is perhaps that's just a tradition of this body.
I think that may be the case, and I guess my suggestion would be, it is always better to state what you want to have happen, to have a clear record of what your motion was. If you, for example, wanted to recommend approval and you vote down a motion to deny, that doesn't necessarily manifest approval. So I would suggest if you have a direction you're inclined to head, that the
So
motion
the
be
motion be in
made.
that regard.
Yes.
Okay, I appreciate that insight. Okay. So, retract what I just said, make the motion how you feel, and then we'll do an up or down roll call vote.
Chair, I guess the question in my mind is, do we do this all in one motion?
Yeah.
Or do we do it in 7?
I think we need to construct the end motion, and oftentimes,
backwards
we
if
do
needed.
that item by item, and then we get to the end, and perhaps it's not supported because the pieces don't link together. So, hearing what items people are willing to be flexible on first, I think is a good direction to go. And I guess I would suggest maybe we do that backwards, 7 through 1.
Is that because number 1's the biggest deal?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, well, I mean, they kind of are in the order that I perceive that we're going to have issues with. So, number 7, principal building setbacks. While that probably is good planning, I don't think that there's any way to back into that logically to change those setbacks today. Is that, so that would be something that if the rest of the agreement takes place, that we would be willing to allow for those existing setbacks to exist.
It's my feeling that as long as the existing buildings are standing there,
Yeah.
the setback should be allowed. However, if the building gets knocked down, destroyed, then the building setback should be brought into whatever the zoning or the requirement is at that point in time.
Okay, so you're offering, what really, again, people already have is a grandfathered building
Yes.
setback,
Correct.
and you're suggesting that you would not be willing to allow that to be rebuilt that way?
Yes.
Perhaps, okay, all right. I guess all of these are going to, be viewed through that same scope of, well, that's, every one of these, let me look before I'm not sure that signage necessarily is that, because we have other ordinances on signage, but, the setbacks would be difficult to change, that's why they're grandfathered.
That's right.
But given an opportunity to modify that, are there other people that would be willing to allow those to continue? Even in rebuilding? I mean, the rebuilding is what we're talking about.
These are all on interior roads, correct?
That's correct. The setbacks.
So the public setbacks are fine.
The total setbacks for the entire.
Of the outside of this development meets those current setbacks, my understanding. I already suggested that these are the easy ones that we're talking about here, so
I'm
I'm
actually
gonna
okay
need
with
some
that.
help here.
I'm
more
actually
time.
fine with number 7.
Yeah, I'm
so-
okay with that, too.
Okay.
And I'm fine with number 4, and I'm fine with number 5.
I have to ask about the, slow down. Mr. Katz, are you in accord with that?
Are we voting on 7 and 4?
Let's just vote on, let's just go ahead and vote on
I'm
7.
jumping ahead.
Okay, yes, yes.
All right. So, we're not doing a roll call on these, but I'm just gonna ask for a voice vote.
Can we do that?
Pardon?
Is that acceptable?
In our intermediate agreement to things that works,
So
correct?
it sounds like the motion you'd be considering would be a motion to approve a waiver of item number 7. So a yes vote would be authorizing a departure from that, and a no vote would be not
Proving it.
approving a waiver.
So
So,
Correct. And ultimately, these are just consensus building votes is what I'm looking for here.
so that motion would be in order if somebody would want to make that.
Okay.
Mr.
What's that?
Did you, Roger, did you make one? Or
I think he
is
stated
that
his
tech-
opinion.
Oh, is that just an opinion? Okay.
Yeah, I just stated an opinion.
Okay. We need a motion on the table for further discussion.
I'll make a motion.
Okay?
That the site plan presented be approved to allow for the existing building locations, bringing the legally non-conforming status in conformity with the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
Move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Now, this is the proper time for discussion, but I don't know that we need to do anymore. Okay? So all those in favor of the motion suggest so by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. So we don't have a hang-up there. 6 as your, this 6 actually, if we do a PUD, is self-fulfilling. Is that correct? That erases the lot line that you're describing here.
Yes.
Okay. So I would suggest that 6 would follow the ones above, and we really don't need to talk about that. It's not something that people are going to note other than legal property ownership. Does everybody understand what I'm saying there? Yeah. If it is a PUD, then 6 is fulfilled. Otherwise, we have units that perhaps are severed in 2 because of some lot line things. Number 5 is landscaping. The property is landscaped with 646 plants across the site. Security Properties is working with the DeKalb Police Department to identify areas that could be trimmed back or trimmed back to open the common areas of the development. Final design would be consistent with crime prevention and environmental design. So we're suggesting there that there is enough landscaping, it just needs to be trimmed and maintained so that we have better visuals. Is that,
A little column A, little column B, yes. Some need to be trimmed back, some need to be removed. Other areas may need to have additional plantings installed based upon some of the other improvements that are being proposed.
okay. So functionally, I don't see a whole lot of, gee, we're negotiating numbers in here. Oftentimes we have, well, you need 50 more trees or things like that. Okay. What I read this variance as being is an agreement to work with our police department and other departments to make sure that they're functionally satisfactory to reduce hiding places and things like that. Am I summarizing that correctly?
It's a fair statement.
Okay.
I move that the landscaping consideration be accepted with the city's recommendations on both removal, trimming, addition.
Okay, I have a motion.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on that? All in favor of approval of that motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so we have agreement on 5. Now they get a little bit harder. Signage. This is a property in DeKalb that competes with lots of other properties in DeKalb that should meet the signage. I'm not going to say that they all do, but the requesters are suggesting that this is a large property, a major property, and that they maintain the signs that there are. You're not really suggesting that bigger signs are happening. This is maintaining, correct? Okay. The way they are. And replacing where needed from time to time at that signage, because signage does wear out from time to time. What thoughts do people have in that regard?
Signage is staying the same that it currently is, correct?
Correct.
Given the size of the property, I would be in favor of keeping it as is.
Okay. So is that a motion?
I guess it could be.
Second.
Well, is it?
Yes, it is a motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Is there a second? Okay. You know, I don't recall, I mean, I've looked at the signage for 50 years. I don't recall that I thought it was overbearing. It is a big property, and I think adequately resolves people's needs to know, but I don't think it, I can think of some other signs that are overflow. Any other discussion or comments on that issue?
Just a question, if I
Go
may.
ahead.
Did any of the existing signs create any vision problems in terms of traffic? None at all? Okay.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the motion on number 4 signage, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Lighting. Fixture height and average illumination. The City of DeKalb's Unified Development Ordinance restricts the height of light poles in residential districts to a maximum height of 15 feet. Development's light poles are 20 to 25 feet tall. The light illumination averages, I think I'm just going to say totals on average of 1.5 to 2 foot candles for the entire development. Security properties are committed to add light poles in the development where light is deficient. We're penalizing a lot of people for not simply a deficiency, but an overflowingness. I can't think of a piece here where I feel that that's the case, but I think it's something that we ought to make sure that everybody understands. We have in the northwest quadrant of DeKalb several streets that we have doubled the light capacity on because we found that it was an improvement in terms of security. The maximum height of these light poles, again, goes back to distribution of that? Is that why we have the 15 feet poles in our code? Or,
I guess I don't understand your question.
I don't understand the lighting. Right now, they have 25-foot pole.
Mm-hmm.
And this is suggesting that we will allow that to continue, but then space in some poles where there's inadequate light.
Correct.
Okay. So the 25-foot ones are creating the inadequacies, or tree limbs are creating the inadequacies, or?
So I think you have a 15-foot maximum in the residential zoning district, so
Yeah.
you don't have overflow or the flooding that you were referring to.
Yes.
This was certainly constructed, which I have to assume predates the 15-foot
I'm sure.
tall light poles. It could be a variety of overgrowth of trees that provides inadequacies. It could be areas that previously weren't traversed by those walking through the development, going around the development, whatever the case might be. When we conducted our site visit on the one particular evening last winter, there was not a shortage of light bulbs that were out. Now, coupled with bulbs that needs to be replaced, with areas of darkness, it was hard to determine in some particular areas if in fact it's a fixture problem or if it's a light bulb problem. Nevertheless, there are certainly areas that are being proposed to be redeveloped with walkways or sidewalks, whatever that might be, in between buildings where light flow currently does not occur. And so you're seeing that in revised lighting plans that exist. So you couple a couple of different approaches to that with the site visit at night, and then you plan for areas that you believe will need to have additional lighting in the future, brings you forth with the revised plan showing that based upon the photometrics, the lighting now has a minimum conditions being met for the areas that are needed.
So what is it that we're really giving waivers for in lighting?
The height.
The height of the poles?
Yeah.
Okay. Your concerns about that? Go ahead.
Well, it also makes reference to more will be added where necessary, so those will be 2025 as well, or just?
I don't know that we talked about the prototypes for those areas.
Because it says committed to adding light poles in development where lighting is
Sure.
deficient. So do we have 20, 25, and 15-foot poles, all different areas depending on the need, or?
I think you have the ability to allow either. I think the preference would be in the areas, there's something to be said for consistency, for
That's-
replacement factor.
That's kind of where I was going with it,
On the other
uniformity.
hand, these are new light poles, so you could also take the approach to have adherence to what the current code is as well, since these are new areas that presumably are going to be near bedrooms, et cetera, that you don't want the height in some of these new locations where you're getting accessible entryways of the couple areas I can think of in particular.
And that's, I guess, where my confusion comes is, so we would have, 25, 20, and 15 footers of different newness and everything, so it already would lack consistency, so it's.
So to simplify a motion, if that's what you're seeking, your motion could be to approve existing as it stands. Any new light would adhere to the current standard of the city of DeKalb as one option. The other is a consistent lighting fixture for all particular poles and masts and arms and bulbs, however you want to do that, but.
Now, if we were to bring them in compliance of 15 with this, that would necessitate replacement of the other ones to match, correct? No?
No, you have the ability through the PUD to motion for that in particular, to say what's there and existing can continue, much like you have the other areas and arenas here. So if a new sign were to come in, the expectation is they're proposing going back one step to where you've all agreed to something that is not in conformance with code. If a new sign were to come in, whatever that might be, if it's not an identification sign and it's something as a directional sign, for example, a new directional sign would need to conform with the city's articles and the codes for signage on directional signs, so it could not exceed the minimum requirements. So what they've asked for is consideration to not reduce the current poles that are in place to meet the standards of the city, to leave the current light poles as they situate today.
Can you, just for clarification, what is the 1.5 to 2 foot candles? Is that the,
So that is a measurement of
Like
light
the-
intensity.
oh, okay.
A candle foot measurement is the intensity of the light. So as you see in the residential, it goes from a lower range up to the heavy industrial district, which is a much higher range of lighting emittance.
So then that would indicate why more poles are needed in
Yeah,
certain areas.
when you look at the
Well,
photometric plan,
So the higher the source of the light is, the lower the intensity is going to be at the bottom.
Right,
So, the regulations then drive in the direction of shorter, not so tall poles, such that the intensity at the bottom is higher.
okay,
And that's what those units kind of refer to indirectly.
thank you.
That does kind of aim towards, 25-foot poles are not the standard anymore.
Right,
There's a lot of
Right.
second and third floor rooms
Yeah.
and apartments that are gonna be, I was thinking of, the light from the outside, being a problem for other developments. But within the development, having a pole that's 25 feet tall distributes into those areas.
into the apartments and.
And, so and that's why I started with the beginning of, it's not just meeting the minimums, but it's also meeting, where does light not go that you don't want it to go to?
Right,
So, so we're kind of we're now into the three issues that become, relatively pertinent. And I have not gone and ascertained my personal feeling on, how well it's working right now. I do remember a lot of light in my bedroom, 40 years ago, but,
But when you're a kid who's 2 years old and you're out running around and the parent can't see you because the lighting isn't sufficient, that's kind of.
Correct.
Or you're an adult who's under 5 feet and has the same problem.
So what is contemplated through the staff recommendation would be a process where the existing lights would be brought into operation. So we would know exactly what the light levels were. And there are areas where new paths are proposed, as the planner indicated, that don't currently have lighting. Those would need to be lit. And the petitioner has indicated that if there are other areas identified that are still deficient in lighting, once the existing lights are repaired, that additional lights could be installed to make sure that the site was adequately lit.
I don't have that piece in my backup with me tonight. Were there like whole sections that needed lights? Or there were like, just the lights were out, the bulbs were out? Are we talking needing to put poles in large sections?
There are areas where there are informal pedestrian paths that would be replaced by permanent sidewalks, and those don't have any lighting. But that may be just the length of the end of a building. It may be a 50 or 70-foot stretch that would have a new sidewalk that is currently not lit, and that may only require one light. But yes, there are areas that don't have any lights at all that would have new paths and would clearly require lighting.
so what I hear us saying is, there's an agreement to put lighting where it ought to be. What the variance that's being asked for is that we don't require every 25-foot pole to become a 15-foot pole.
Correct.
But that adequate lighting be required where it's needed, where we decide that it's needed, or an agreement comes that
Yes,
there's lighting?
it would be through the plan unit development agreement. I think what we would contemplate would be that it would have to meet the approval of the police department. Probably the police department and the principal planner, as I think about it, to ensure that we're addressing any safety concerns arising out of new pathways being constructed that don't have lighting, and to ensure that we're addressing the planning concerns of shielding the residents of University Village and residents of adjoining properties.
So the changes to the 25-foot poles may be in shielding as opposed to heights. I mean, so if there's overflow where we see the quality of life being lowered because people have all these lights shined in the windows, that is something that they're willing to work on, or we're just looking at the minimums, so we're trying to get, up. Again, there's kind of this correct range. And what I keep coming back to is, I think we can agree that there are places we need more. Have we agreed that there are places we need better directed light? In your mind? I mean, have we gone to that, or is that being developed after we approve or not approve?
So the two things that you have that brought forth staff's recommendation is in the 15th packet. You had a photometric plan.
Yes.
And within that photometric plan, it showed the light levels, the candle-foot watt power, and they were ranging from 0.10 on the low end up to, if I remember right, 9s and 10s perhaps in some areas of what I would call hot areas. That's certainly one mechanism to gauge lighting. How you restrict lighting is by the height of the pole, first and foremost, and then by the shielding of the pole if we're talking about fixtures. You couple the photometric plan with the site visit that was conducted last winter. And honestly, I couldn't offer you a confident assertion of our area is going to be addressed by replacing the light bulbs. we've not revisited University Village at night to see if the bulbs have been replaced and to gauge whether or not those areas of concern have been addressed. And then you couple that with the redevelopment of the project, and you start contemplating where new walkways and new areas of improvements will be installed. We are bound to be in a situation to where at some point in time, we're going to realize additional lighting needs to occur in areas that we haven't considered thus far. We're planning for it, but until we get out on site and actually see it, there could be an oak tree in the way. And so when you have real-world scenarios put and affix itself to a plan that's presented before you, it's not an affirmation to say we've covered it all. So I could support Attorney Frieder's recommendation to revisit it to ensure that all the proper areas are lit well enough and not hot spots to where it becomes a detriment to the surrounding properties as well.
I think you have 3 questions then.
Yes.
Are you okay with the height of the existing poles? Do you have a preference on the height of new poles? And are you okay with directing that as a part of any development agreement that the lighting levels would be evaluated and approved by the city in areas that are deficient?
Do you want to make that a motion?
I'm going to make it a motion.
There you go.
So I move to allow the variance such that the existing 25 feet tall poles stand as they are, that any new light fixtures would accommodate be within the city code. And third, that we reach an agreement where security properties and City of DeKalb police agree on what those new light fixtures would need to be and so on and so forth. Those,
So your item 2, does that include them being 15 feet in height?
No, he said original.
You're allowing
yes.
25
The new
cents.
ones.
yes, the
The
new,
new
so
ones
the new,
that are
new
gonna meet
poles
code.
would have to be within code, which
Yes.
is the 15-foot high.
But the original lights can stay as is.
They can stay. I'm sorry, that's a motion. Staying.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right. You know, part of what I keep looking at is, you know, the lighting is changing so rapidly. You know, it wouldn't surprise me if they changed every fixture on the building. Now, whether they come down to 25 feet, I mean, they're not cutting the poles down, is kind of what I'm saying. Okay, so we have a motion. Does everybody understand what the motion says? Okay. We're keeping the 25 feet, we're adding 15s where we're adding, and then we're negotiating with the planner and the police, you know, to make sure that they meet the needs as described.
The order of those 3 items is not necessarily set in stone. In other words, negotiating with the police might very well be the requirement for establishing what is new and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And what is new has to be within code.
I think that's a reasonable statement. Okay, yes.
Just as a point of discussion. if
Uh-huh.
I may. Okay, getting back to the whole grandfathering thing regarding the lots, the parking lot, wouldn't the lighting fixtures as the current stand be grandfathered in regardless unless they were destroyed somehow? Or is this something that we have the objectivity to make a ruling on that they would have to be replaced and brought within ordinance if we wanted to? That's a question.
I think you-
You understand?
Yeah, the answer to that is that there's not typically a mechanism to approve a planned unit development where you are still grandfathering part of a use. That's not necessarily a good planning approach, and it would be very difficult to understand how you could enforce that, where you could say, part of what you're doing is legal, but the rest of it isn't. So our recommendation would be that you address the whole question and give your thumbs up or thumbs down on it.
I'm just hung up on the whole 15-foot new ones, 20-foot old ones, 25-foot old ones thing sitting around there. That's just what I keep envisioning in my mind in the lots of University Village, and it just mentally sounds terrible, but.
And here, let me
That's my
offer,
problem.
if I may, let me offer this up. I don't know that we're talking 3 separate styles. I think you have a range of 20 to 25 feet because no one has taken a stepladder out there with a meter stick or a measuring tape to say each one is this height. So I don't, unless I'm mistaken, I don't believe that there's 3 separate styles of
Yeah, it's just
lights
not-
that we're talking about. It's current and proposed for new.
Okay, any other questions or discussion?
David, just for question about your motion. So any new lighting is what you're saying within code, which is the 15 feet, correct?
Correct.
If, this might be a question for you guys, if something were catastrophically to happen in the area and they have to replace light poles, then are we saying those light poles can be replaced at 20 to 25 feet, or they be replaced at the new code of 15 feet?
If we replaced, so assume that this motion is approved and then 2 years from now, a snowplow hits the light and takes it out, it would be replaced at the 20 to 25 feet.
Okay.
Because if it was replaced with a shorter light, it would affect the light patterns and we'd have to go back in and maybe add additional poles or something.
Or something
So-
like that? Thank you.
Okay, good question. Any other questions, concerns, discussion?
I'm sorry, I have to say something about that. I mean, the lightning bolt comes down, the thing falls down to the ground. It is insecurity property's interest to get back to the police, just because there's always, I'm just in terms of this design of the area, just because it might be even cheaper to install a 15-foot pole or two, as opposed to a 25-foot pole. So it's not that necessarily they're gonna go back to a 20-foot pole.
Nobody requires them to do that. They're allowed up to that height of the original.
Thank you
pole.
very much.
So from
We'll
15
be
to the
allowing
25
them, if
feet.
they want to stick a 15 in there after it goes down, they can, but they have the ability to do 25.
And they may have somebody who is concerned about the aesthetics of the place and decide, well, I want two instead of 215 as opposed to 120. Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor of the three-part motion for lighting, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Now, number 2, the parking ratio. Describes this property as being just under 500 spaces short, 400 and some change. And again, I go back to, I don't believe that parking is something that oftentimes it's described as stable. You know, we met, we looked in the parking places, and there weren't an overflow of cars. Doesn't mean that there aren't cars that ought to be in that development that are parking someplace else because it's convenient or cheaper or those kinds of things. And at the same time, this is our one shot at coming up with a resolution that will fit the purpose for the next 30 or 40 years. What do people feel about parking?
Well, the question I have, and Derek, perhaps you can help me with this. I mean, it is feasible to land bank some space on this site for future parking if it becomes needed.
Yeah, so at the last meeting, I recall putting up on the screen a site plan that shows where and how this particular development could park the additional stalls that are required as per code. Within that Exhibit 5 from the meeting on the 15th, it is noted it takes up areas of open space and grass areas, but if the need arises, there is an opportunity to land bank or park bank it similarly to what you've done in the past with other developers.
And I think that's the key phrase, if the need arises. That, right now, you're contention is, and we believe it, that there isn't a need for that whole parking requirement to be there in existence right now. But if and when the time came that it did become necessary, you're going to want it, because you're going to have angry residents if it doesn't exist, and you're going to have angry neighbors when it starts to flow out into the streets or into other neighborhoods. So I mean, personally, I don't think it's unreasonable to make that requirement so that there is a potential that can be addressed whenever that is.
So what I hear you saying is, again, everything's grandfathered today. Is it your suggestion that, that we are not doing that in perpetuity, because there may become a time
Yes.
where we do need to use that? So
Yes.
is it your thought that we not grandfather the parking? And if there's a structural change in this development by Mother Nature, that's part of the discussion at that time? Or if there's a need 10 years from now because of the changing habits of the population of the people who live here, we also would believe that we need a mechanism to, when you say the banking those parking spaces, a mechanism of describing to the then current owner, whoever that is, that you need to create 50 more parking spaces.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with this project in terms of University Plaza. If I understand from that they do have land banking for parking, and how is that triggered when the need becomes? When is that need triggered? It can't just be a catastrophic event. It's got to be the need.
No, certainly not. If I remember right, they were required to do annual or even biannual inspections and verification of the utilization of their parking lot.
And when you say they, that's the ownership?
Yes, I'm sorry, University Plaza
Okay.
ownership was required to do an analysis by providing photographs, et cetera, of, I think it was a week straight that they were providing some indication of the use of the parking field. If at some point in time, and if I remember right, 80% of the stalls were being utilized or greater at any point in time, that triggers the need to erect then the secondary parking lot that was banked, not an incremental improvement, that
All
the
at once.
full remainder of the parking be provided on the area just to the east of the Plaza Towers.
Is 80%, is that trigger at 80%? Is that standard for what you've done in these situations in DeKalb?
We haven't done it.
Or is this a
It's-
unique one?
It's standard now, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. But yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. Is that, I think it would be, I think it would be useful to bank it, to have them do some, whether it's yearly or every other year or whatever, but it's some periodically that they should provide some type of a parking study, if you will, to verify the need for parking or the lack of it.
Under the terms of the Plaza agreement, it's twice a year, and it was based on the anticipated student residency schedule, so it was a beginning of year, end of year type situation. And the city also has the ability to independently go in and do our own count, and any of those, if they hit the 80% threshold, can trigger the improvement.
Okay.
Yes.
Just to refresh our memories with respect to what you presented, Derek, 2 weeks ago. In the case of University Plaza, the banking was a green area, or the area that was banked was a green area that was owned by University Plaza. And if this mechanism triggers them to comply with greater parking spaces, then they would use and develop that green area that they own. So in this case, and again, this is a part of refreshing that map that you showed 2 weeks ago, if this were to be built now, do they have the area to build these parking spaces, these additional parking spaces?
Simply, yes,
Okay,
yes.
I want to make sure that we're not talking pie in the sky and then we trigger something that is impossible because they don't have the area.
But it comes at the sacrifice of the open space or the park areas, or, so they do have areas that they can expand parking fields. And if you want to continue, I can go try to find it and put it up on the screen again.
I just wanted for the record to make sure that
Okay.
indeed this area existed, unless anybody else wants to see the map again.
Yeah, I think my recollection of the map is that it does exist. It would not be, what a lot of people would recommend because there again, you've got a lot of blacktop and putting more blacktop down, now there needs to be more detention, which oftentimes, creates its own space issue. So the question before us is, do we just automatically waive that requirement for those 500 spaces in perpetuity? Or do we require one of two things, that they can go through a process semi-annually and discover that there's a need? In this case, I'm not sure that I would, I don't think it's as important that they do the entirety because of how the parking would be scattered throughout. Those are the places that the green space is. And you could do a section or two and see the improvement, as opposed to doing a big parking lot that we're talking about at the plaza. Incrementally would be awkward and haphazard and different levels and things. Again, in the northwest quadrant, parking is a real issue, and I guess part of my problem with that methodology is that you really don't know if you captured all the parking that this piece of property is creating. People may be parking up on an overnight street. I don't know what the reason would be right off, but it certainly happens. And so the neighbors can't, because the parking at the neighbor's property may be more ideal for the individual resident, because they get to see their friend and then go home, or whatever. And for us to try and capture one of the cars that this or any development creates, I think is more difficult than we're immediately imagining. And I certainly believe that that's true with the University Plaza, where, the biggest lot the university owns is across the street, and they're gonna charge parking permits equal to what, the parking across the street is, and that's more flexible because I can go park over by the PE building too. And those issues, we're not addressing, and it concerns me because that just moves the cars in the parking around. And again, we have not approved some things because there are one parking place short, or whatever, or go by the cinema parking lot. So I guess I'm looking at this and saying, I don't hear a whole lot of, and tell me if I'm wrong, a whole lot of favor of what you've got is okay in perpetuity. That's really what a waiver does. And the rest of what we're discussing is a mechanism to meet the real need of this development as it continues to go through the developing that it's gonna over the next 50 years. You know, so I don't know that I'm hearing, gee, let's have a waiver for this. But maybe it's just not been vocalized yet.
So at the last meeting, I believe that I actually asked about the parking and that if we were to approve it, because looking back on my notes, that we could put in a condition to be able to park bank or however Deb classified it. That was one of the questions that I had asked. And so having that clarification a little bit tonight actually has helped me get that question answered a little more thoroughly. But I think also at the last meeting it was that there was some space. It would maybe take away a couple of amenities that maybe might go in. But it was doable if that was a condition that we put in.
I don't hear anybody saying we want to require parking from the beginning that meets the standard. But I also don't hear anybody saying, I want to waive the standard. So we're in the middle of that.
Let me understand something, Chair Welsh. You're bringing up some inconsistencies in parking availability and almost to some extent policies across the city. I don't remember very well whether this was, I'm confusing the whole University's Plaza with University Village at this point. Is there a system where the management requires residents to have a sticker in their car? Do they have to pay a fee to be able to park their car in the complex? So the answer is no to the fee and require sticker for parking in the University Plaza area.
Oh, in the plaza, they do charge.
I'm sorry, University Village.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
okay.
I'm sorry, University Village.
Right.
So that provides a mechanism for the monitoring to make sure that whoever is parking there has a permit to park there, as opposed to commuting students that discover that they can park in University Village, park there on a daily basis, and then also security properties is on the hook to put up more parking because students are parking in the wrong place. I'm stating certain things here just to make sure that we got the logic right. So, in other words, there are mechanisms within the mechanism of monitoring future parking use and so on and so forth. There are mechanisms for security properties to secure that the people that are parked there are the residents and those that have permit to park there. Makes sense then, or it makes it more plausible to propose a system where, on a biannual basis, following the pattern or the agreement with University Plaza that would trigger security properties to put more parking or continue in the system they were.
Yeah, you could simply offer a no-cost sticker
Yes.
for each resident, and that would help you identify, like you said, who belongs there and who doesn't. And if people are starting to show up that don't have that sticker, and I don't mean to get in the minutiae here, but but then you just simply tow them away. But you don't, I mean, his point is well taken. You don't want people to be, counted unfairly against your parking needs, so.
The testimony was that they do have parking permits, and they also have visitor permits for tenants, that you can have a visitor come and park, and they track all of those.
Yeah.
So the only loop in all this, and I want to be fair to what Chair Welsh is bringing up, is that let's say that you have a car with a permit and a visitor with a permit and a second visitor for which you may not have a permit, then ends up parking. This is an extreme. I recognize that, but that person may end up parking on the streets, and then that becomes a problem because of inconsistencies in parking, so on and so forth. I just want to recognize that I think that's in part what Chair Welsh is bringing up. Is that correct? Am I stating that correct?
Yes.
As an example.
I guess what I'm describing, because this is the second development that we're considering this in, that, again, we're precedent setting, that other people will require this or request this. And I'm also suggesting that there are ways that either the University Village controls or the plaza controls, i.e. price, doesn't have to be free, nobody, mandates that they have free passes, or human nature dictates, well, it's closer to park on the street because I'm right down by Crane Avenue, that I don't want to say manipulate, but that it's not a simple, all cars from this property have to be in here, and we've mandated, or, there's a requirement that they park where they ought to park, or we think they ought to park, or whatever. And where these two properties are more self-contained and far enough away that maybe that works, guy number 3, that's three parking places short, says, oh, I'll put those in if, and I know exactly where one of those places ought to be. I say, go talk to the church and buy a 10 by 10 piece of property, and then you fit the requirement. We're creating this mechanism that I don't know who's going to maintain. I don't know, who's going to manipulate, but it's manipulatable. And again, this isn't necessarily the place that I'm worried about, but number 1 and number 2 are the major issues that, again, I would conjecture are precedent setting, and that will be tried to be used again, maybe properly, maybe improperly. Again, I don't think anybody's just plain saying there's enough, and there's nobody that's saying you have to add it tomorrow. We're in the middle area, and that's precedent setting. And that's all I'm conjecturing, because we've got a lot of issues that we're trying to determine here.
And it is important to remember, kind of as a foundational element in this discussion, that the fact that we're establishing a precedent deviation from the code doesn't necessarily mean that it's worse than the code. And in this specific case, it is a true statement that we reach an agreement with University Plaza that sounds a lot like what we're discussing right now. And it is also true that that is a recent agreement. So we have the basis and the skeleton of what that was, but we don't have the experience of how that is going to work. So we don't know, still, at this point, we really don't know. We don't have any evidence to believe that it's a good idea, but it is not necessarily a bad idea just because it is a deviation from the code.
Yeah, I was just going to say, too, that unless I misunderstand, the precedent has already been set.
Absolutely.
We aren't setting a precedent by asking them to do the same thing as University Plaza. That was already done. I mean, my only interest in proposing something like this is that, A, it is being done with a property right next to it, basically. Mm-hmm. Secondly, we don't want to, in my mind, personally, I don't want to just waive the parking requirement flat out, because I do believe that there could come a time, and I think anybody that owns this, either now or 20 years from now, needs to be prepared for changes. And if we blanketly say waive it, that possibility for dealing with that change is gone. Am I not correct? Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to find a way that rather than impose a requirement on the developer to put in acres of concrete that they don't need right now, and they can prove they don't need, and we all recognize they don't need, how do we address a change in the future to get to the same point?
One of the ways that especially when you're doing something new that we've never gone a full year on, when we're creating situations, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this, is you sunset things. You can say, we will do this for the next 5 years and see how that works. And at that point, we're gonna have this discussion again, and the current owner then is gonna, going to have to be willing to work with the city of DeKalb, to make sure that we're moving forward correctly. Is that the right thing here? I don't know. I'm just suggesting that, before we do 10 of these, I'd like to see 1 or 2 of them work. And this is the number 2, and I would say that, the first one you do is a fluke, and the second one is definitely a precedent. We think that that's important going forward.
With all due respect, how is it a fluke? I mean,
Well-
wasn't it a decision of a planning and zoning commission to allow that?
It was, have some people gone back and said, well, gee, that wasn't really the way that I would have done that if I got to think more about it. Again, I'm not thinking that way yet because I haven't seen the thing work for a year. But, that's a pretty singular building in the plaza that has this big chunk of land that maybe a parking lot 5 years from now, 10 years from now, okay? This one, there isn't this big chunk of land. We're gonna carve it out of all the places that, or a lot of the places that people thought green space ought to be. And so I'm in no rush to put parking in, but, also just suggesting that, we're making decisions that people after us will have to deal with for a long time.
If I can throw something in just to complicate it more, in case people didn't notice it, kind of 1 and 2 need to be considered in a bit of comprehension longitudinally because, well, frankly, what we decide on 1 may influence number 2 down the road as far as density and the requirement of which. So that's just something else to consider.
Okay, I'm willing to entertain a proposal, or we could move on to number 1 and see if there's a need for a proposal in number 2.
So because my math brain isn't working at the moment, if we were to go with number 1, staying with the current code of 12 units per acre, what would the parking ratio then need to be, let's say?
Figure it's chopping a third off, it'll chop off a third of the parking, taking it down to a little over 800, which is only about maybe 50, 60 more than 795.
So you have a very valid point.
Just,
Thank you.
sorry, I do numbers for a living, as Derek knows.
Yeah.
Well, my point on that is, we're not talking about reducing the density by 50%.
I know. I was latching on to your point of the longitudinal view
Yeah.
of parking and what could happen potentially.
Right, and the
That's-
other
that's my
aspect that
thought with
I
it.
think we need to also consider is this is low-income housing versus University Plaza, where the residents there can afford a car per person or a car per unit. Just my opinion.
And my response to that is, currently, these 2 uses are those things.
Correct. Until 2040, at the moment, it's low-income housing with
Or until
residents
Or until
who.
it's renegotiated out of
Correct,
that, right?
correct.
It's also probably worth noting that the parking calculation is based both on unit count and bedroom count. So it'd be possible to reduce the number of units and have more multi-bedroom units, and that may not have as appreciable of an impact in reducing the required parking count.
Right.
So you had mentioned earlier, kind of like an acceptance with an analysis plan on some sort of basis. I mean, is that something that is feasible and amenable? If that, correct me if I'm wrong, if that's not what you had mentioned before about your notes.
Oh, no, I had asked at the last meeting, if we could add a condition onto the parking that it be allowed to be added in the future if needed, similar to what Deb was asking,
Okay.
about the park banking.
Still looking for a motion. I think before we do any further discussion, that's probably in order.
Okay, I'll try one here. Okay, I'm going to move to, and help me here. I'd like to make a motion to maintain the current parking requirements with the condition that the existing number of parkings continue with the addition of an arrangement to provide for a land bank, or whatever you technically call it, for future parking, to be determined on a yearly basis through the results of a parking study performed by security properties and/or the management.
So
Is
Deb,
that correct?
Point of clarification, do you mean current parking spaces, not current parking requirements?
Current parking
Okay.
spaces. Yes.
So essentially, a similar arrangement to what's contemplated by University Plaza?
Yes.
And would that include an 80% threshold as well?
Yes.
Okay, is there a
Second.
second? Thank you. Discussion. Would your motion include, if they meet the 80% threshold, fulfilling the requirement immediate or?
Yes.
Or in pieces?
I think doing it in pieces might become a little complicated. My original thought was just to keep it as simple as possible and do it all at once. If there is a logical way to do it in pieces, fine, if someone wants to suggest that, but at the moment, my motion would just include all at once.
So I guess if you're looking for what that logical step might be, you could include a provision that would give the city council the ability to waive a portion of the requirement or to temporarily waive it. So the 80% threshold is triggered, and that would trigger an obligation to come to city council, and the council would have the ability to say either build all 1,200 or parking spaces, or we believe you only need to build another 200 at this time, so build that and we'll go back to counting.
That's fine. Yeah, I can accept that.
Is that acceptable to the?
Yes. Doing it all at once rather than in phases, correct?
Well, we would allow them to come back, we'll do it all at once, we'll allow them to come back to the city council if they feel that that's not necessary, and revisit it.
Yep.
Any other discussion, questions? Okay, all those in favor of the motion on parking, say aye.
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 Okay, opposed? Passes. Now, we come to the discussion item that makes all of these other things important or moot, I think. Again, would be the grandfathering, continued the grandfathering of the units so that they would continue at 18 units per acre until the standard requirements to reduce them because of their inability to continue their purpose. And sometimes that language has like a 50% destruction kind of quota. Or whether we insist that while those things are grandfathered, we're not going to allow them to be by right, which is really what the question is, which then triggers the ability to do the loan style that these developers have first suggested, I haven't heard them change their mind. Is anybody wanting to offer other directions of that yet? No, I don't see it. Okay. So, whether we want to set the precedent of changing to the right of this development to have 18 units per acre in direct opposition to the last 20 years of, some would say, many would say progress, to a less denser number. And at that point, I'm going to stop and let people either state some other facts or make a proposal.
And just a clarification.
Please.
So just as people are seeking the bravery for a motion on this, as I said, this is currently at 17.99, and essentially approval of this variance for number one would allow them to stay indefinitely at 18.99 for the life of the HUD agreement, or denial of which would still allow for the 17.99 to exist until is such that it is demolished or no longer usable. Whatever that may happen if and when it happens, correct?
On the first point, it would be at 18 dwelling units per acre until the property was someday rezoned.
Indefinitely.
It wouldn't relate to the HUD agreement or anything else.
Okay.
It would be until the property is
Thank you
ever
for that
rezoned.
clarification. So indefinitely, essentially.
Yes.
If somebody else was to come along and make an offer, would they get the 18 units per acre as well? I mean, in the future, they wouldn't have to,
The zoning is not contemplated to be owner-specific. It's not use-specific. It doesn't relate to the HUD or the affordable housing or anything else. It would be 18 dwelling units per acre with that land.
no matter who bought it.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
And in the event regardless, unless like
Right.
destruction
Right.
or no longer usable came into play.
Mhm.
So I'm searching for a motion.
I think it sets the wrong precedent, so I will move that we do not allow the density of 18 dwelling units per acre.
Okay, do I hear a second? For the purpose of discussion, I will second that. So now we need the discussion. Or the vote.
In terms of the 17.99 per acre, I am not in favor of granting that beyond the life of the buildings. In other words, if they get destroyed and they need to be rebuilt, my feeling is that they should be treated like anyone else, and they go to the 12 per acre, or whatever it is at the time that it comes time to be rebuilt. It creates an unfair advantage to the other property owners in the area at the time.
Okay, I have a question. I'm sorry, that
No,
was
that's fine.
you finished your thought, okay. So, I think what most people have thought of is a significant reduction a la tornado, okay? If we have a fire, we have got a great fire department, and we're gonna improve this with all the latest techniques for warning and quick response. 2 units burned down. Or these tend to come in 4s and 6s, I guess. This kicks in immediately in terms of, well, those units are over the number, or is it a proportionality here? Well, how does that work?
It's based on the use, so it would require catastrophic destruction of 50% or more of the property. It wouldn't go down incrementally if a single unit is destroyed.
Okay, so you're saying of the 530 units, or so, 534 maybe, one burns down, they get to put it back up.
And
It's,
that has happened in recent years.
exactly, okay. That's what I wanted to make sure we were talking about. So we would require 280 units to be destroyed
Or no longer livable.
or no longer usable to make a real change in the number of units here. You know, for that to kick in.
The current zoning is such that half or more of the units would have to be destroyed before that would happen.
Okay. So we're really talking about a catastrophic problem in the University Village in totality that would require us to reduce the number of units. Otherwise, they're gonna put them back up anyway. And for that, again, my vision is we give up 30 years of making people commit. I mean, we've been gracious enough to grandfather this piece of property. I don't know that we had to do that. Is that correct? I mean, at the time, it would have been pretty messy otherwise. So your grandfather thinks.
To not grandfather it would have been a condemnation effectively.
Okay.
Planner Highland did point out one excellent point, which is, as you note, one of the variances being considered is the one building per lot issue. As the property is currently configured, there are 3 principal lots by phase of the development. So in terms of evaluating the current status as a legal nonconforming use, we would look on a lot-by-lot basis. So if
Okay.
50% or more of a phase was destroyed, because of the rather unique way this property is configured, that may trigger the legal nonconforming use inability to rebuild a phase.
So it brings it down to 75 to 100 units would have to be destroyed because they're about equal size.
And that may affect an individual phase.
Exactly. Still, a big number that are infinitesimal odds to run into that. But it's really important for this financing to do that. But in terms of our code and our needs for the city to stay on the 12 units per acre, big change here. You know, we're giving somebody that right immediately. Again, it's financing driven. This is not a humanistic approach, it's financing driven. You know, we get the free money if we fulfill this requirement, but the chances of this particular thing happening are infinitesimal, I believe. I don't know
I think
whether that
I-
changes anybody's minds on
Well,
anything.
I think you're pointing at something that is interesting in this. I hope to take this to a different level, not necessarily higher or lower, but I think one of the, there is a burden on our shoulders that if anything, we have to remind ourselves what our duty here is. If anything, is to pass on recommendations to City Council. At the end of the story, City Council will have the final word on this. But the important thing is to recognize that we have a problem in front of us, and it's a difficult one, a very difficult one, because of all the reasons, all the things we have said. But the important thing for us to recognize, for the entire city of DeKalb to recognize, is we cannot wait for a disaster to occur for the problem to be solved. We have to solve the current problem.
Now, what,
And there are consequences going one way or the other. No question about it. And, the chances of a hurricane in this place are minimal. They're non-zero. But they're
Right.
very small.
Right.
Same for a tornado, and we can have this conversation forever. I suggest that we make a decision on this one. I have a strong suspicion that at least the members of this commission know in which direction I lean. And for sure, it is not to wait for a tornado to solve our problems.
So I have one item that I'd like some clarification from Derek or Dean on. In our backup, there is information about 5.13.07, which talks about density bonus. Can you explain that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so when you were provided the history of the density and how the dwelling units per acre were reduced over the last 2 decades, 2.5 decades, the latest revision discusses the 12 units per acre that we're discussing tonight, but also allows for up to a 20% density bonus for unique design, whether that's amenities provided, whether that's sustainability. The thought process behind incorporating that into place, although unique to this particular development, since it's unique and existing, I think the thought process behind that was for your most recent residential development that you considered the Iron Gate development. And so when they came in and showed a plan and a density requirement, they also incorporated some recreational paths. They talked about some amenities. And so there is a set numerical value associated with 4 different elements that all in total add up to 20%. So as part of the PUD, you can get up to a 20% bonus on top of the 12 dwelling units an acre if you believe those 4 criteria are met. That's part of your Unified Development Ordinance in the Plan Development section of the code.
So then, Derek, would that translate into, would that design element, would, like the splash pool that they're going to have, the community rooms are going to have, the tot lots they're going to have, are those all specific elements of that design bonus?
So let me go right to the code and help you understand. A 10% bonus can be given for a minimum of a 5% of the net development area devoted to common open space above the minimum requirement and improved with public pedestrian ways, bike paths, park land, swimming pools, tennis courts, community centers, clubs, buildings, etc. So that is a 10% bonus for consideration. Additional 5% is on creating building site designs and groupings which take advantage of natural terrain and minimize future water runoff and erosion problems. The integration of retention basins into the overall design is encouraged. Variations in building designs are permissible to accomplish that. And then the last 5% is a provision of tree and shrub planting, including peripheral and interior screen planting and fencing, landscaping of parking lots, and the use of existing trees in the plan. This provision shall be a significant and appropriate addition to the required screening and parking lot landscaping requirements found elsewhere in this ordinance. So those are the percentages as identified in the code. Certainly some of the amenities that were identified in the staff report are specifically called out in here, and others you may have a hard time connecting from what's being presented to what's being described.
So we give them let's say, for the sake of argument, all the amenities I just mentioned, for example, they could possibly get a 10% bonus for those.
Correct.
What about the landscaping? In your professional opinion, is this exceeding what's required? Or, I mean, particularly when you're taking into consideration the input that the police department is going to have on this as well?
Sure, and I think I even stated at the earliest meeting that we've had regarding this that the site is quite mature with landscaping. There is a bountiful amount of trees and shrubs, some overgrown, some need to be scaled back. Other areas need to be addressed. So what my instincts tell you on on preface alone, without truly analyzing it, you could give them a bonus of that. I think you're challenged with the runoff and erosion and detention areas for that particular bonus
Okay.
with the natural plantings, but I don't know that would be fair to give a final judgment on that. I'm just giving you a overview of where I think they would be on instinct alone.
But that would raise that would give them an increase of something in the densities that were allowed, right?
As part of a planned unit development rezoning, yes.
Yeah, okay. How do we determine exactly how many? How many more they could get? I mean,
So these,
What, your comfort level?
if you're comfortable with a 10% increase, then you would take 12 dwelling units an acre and add a 10% increase to that. So now you're at 13.2 dwelling units per acre.
Right.
If you say another 5%, then you're at 13.8. 9. 8.
So technically, the most that they could go
Okay.
up to is maybe 14, close to 14.
Maybe, right?
14.2.
Again, that is codified through a PUD. And either way, the answer in the schedule in the backup contemplated if all bonuses were granted, it still wouldn't get to the 17.99 dwelling units per acre, I think is how it was
But
echoed in
you'd
the
be at
staff report.
you'd be at 13.8 per acre though, right?
Right.
You know, some of those items are replacing other items that are either equal value or maybe more. You know, the Todd Spray Ground is replacing a actual swimming pool that, if properly maintained, would have done the same thing. It's just probably not been properly maintained, or they're wanting to change that, but it doesn't say, hey, this is a brand-new amenity. We had a water amenity, you know, we're throwing this other one in. But I think more to the point is, yeah, there's 20% room. There's flexibility in this PUD code, but there's not flexibility that gets you 50% more. And again, we're gonna have to understand and explain this over and over again to people that want to bring a project that are either local or that are coming from St. Charles or, you know, or any place. They want to see what our code says, and then they want to ask for more. And that's the nature of the process. And if there was a real significant reason that I bought into, then I would start adding things up. But if it's so that we can lock into the, you know, not 80%, but the 100% of these units being what they are in one place in the city of DeKalb, I'm not for having 4 of these that are 1/4. I mean, I'm for reusing property. I think we're doing that. And we're not taking any rights away from anyone. But they're coming for a gadget that will get them financing to commit us. And I see no value in either one of those two things. Either their goal, to get free federal money, which commits us to, you know, a continuation of this process for the next 50 years, or modifying our code where they don't really need it. They have the right to have 18 units per acre right now, and they're using those. And that's okay, because that's fair. And the road we're moving down is to have to describe what's fair over and over again with really no limitations here. Maybe 18 isn't really the right fair number. Maybe it ought to be 22. No, that goes against, and we're, you know, several weeks ago, we're called into, this body is a technical body. We're called into question because of a comma and a period, and in how, how could you overlook the comma and the period? There's no overlooking what people are asking us for, and there's no mechanism to get there except to say, let's start over. And I'm not willing to say that.
I think there's no question that something needs to be done to this property, but there are other owners and landlords willing to do that without that financing. So something can be done, and they don't need to be restricted by that financing. It can be fair market.
And there's three ways to get there. These people find different financing that doesn't require that. The current owner decides that he wants to improve the things. Or one of 30 companies that was suggested that are on the list, and maybe it's all 29 or 30 of them, say, well, given, and that's why this whole process was so important, because we're defining the situation. Because they came and conjectured that we would be willing to go to 18. Well, and if we're not, the next guy knows we're not. And the next guy has a list of every unit and everything that needs to be improved. And the next guy, hopefully, will be in here next month, or even more hopefully, these guys will come back. It's not going to be 50 years before this process is done. I would lay money on 6 months that we've approved somebody to do this. But we've approved it that fits within our process.
To try and bring us back to the LaSalle factors then, it sounds like what Commissioner Katz and Chair Welsh are indicating is that you don't believe that the rezoning request that's sought, that the denial of that would have a significantly appreciable adverse impact on property value compared to the associated detriment to the public of approving a higher density. Is that a fair characterization?
I think it's fair to say, I don't know what the price is that's being offered now, but the next person that's looking at this project will know what a fair, because people are going to work on, gee, can I make a profit at this? They will know what's required, they will know what the parameters are, and they will bring a fair price. They may be getting a bargain already, they may be paying too much. I don't have that information, but in order to be fair to this community, I would take the stand that I'm taking. I mean, is it fair to give one person rights that we're not giving someone else? Well, that's, a lot of court cases have been settled on that, and I don't think that's the path I want to go down. We have a framework. We have to work within that framework or prove that there's an absolute need to do it differently.
However, I mean, if I'm looking at this list of 8 elements of the LaSalle zoning factors, I'm seeing almost all, the first 7 as being addressed by this project. The 8th one is irrelevant, which makes the decision even harder if that's part of the focus.
Number 1, the existing uses and zoning of nearby property.
Right. Similar use as this.
Do they have 18 units per acre? Some have less.
The extent to which the property values will be diminished by the zoning requested. Are they going to be diminished surrounding?
The surrounding units?
Yes.
Well,
Do we know that?
I can give you some anecdotal of that if you desire, yes.
I mean, I don't know how the rest of the commission feels about the application of these. The public need for the proposed purpose. the suitability of the property for the zone purpose, the relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship on the individual owner, perhaps not the hardship on the individual owner, but the gain to the public. Is that up there?
And then you got number 7, the thoroughness with which the city has planned and zoned its land use. And again, that's something that over the last 20 years, I think we've done, and before that probably, but in the last 20 years, we've defined this.
And Chair Welch, I think I will be the first one recognizing that there has been a lot of work, time, effort put into where we are today. People that came before us to write these codes and think really hard about where we are today and where we want it to be. The question that then I ask is, in that progress, where is University Village? And
We've not had the oversight, was that a question for me?
oh, no,
Oh, okay.
I was calling on your attention, but not necessarily for you.
Well, we've not had the insights into some of the problem areas and the solutions for those in the past. We now have those. I don't think anything that's been done over the last 6 months has been wasted. In fact, I think it's in preparation for the right person to come and develop this using the right tools. And I'm not saying that they're the wrong people, unless their only source of financing for any project they ever do is to get free money from the federal government and require that things that haven't worked in the past continue. I don't see it good, I think we're both looking at the point that there's been a downward trend line. I think we agree on that. And I'm suggesting, do we continue the programs that have driven it down? Or do we allow for flexibility in who and what is doing this to change the methodology of this property? And when we enter an agreement with HUD, well, we will enter with it, but we won't participate in it. We will see the results of it for the next 40 years. I mean, this is the point where we can make a change. We can say, no, Mr. HUD, you come look at this, help us agree on what is the right things to do. Not that we're going to change that immediately, but that we have a plan to change that over time. Or we say, let's continue to do what we've been doing. In fact, let's say not 80% of these are going to be, the same level of poverty or the same level of need. Let's make it 100%. See if that improves the situation. I mean, that's what's being offered to us. That's my response.
I understand.
And there's other people that would, that have listened, will listen, and will make a different proposal, this group included, to improve this piece of property.
Chairman Walsh,
Yes.
depending on how much more discussion we have.
Well, I'm either ready for I'm ready for a motion of extension or,
We got a motion on there.
I have a motion.
We have a motion on the table.
okay.
We either need to
All right.
defer that and make a motion.
Well, let's then, unless somebody has some other points to make, let's go ahead and take a vote on that, on number 1.
Want to reiterate what it was?
Please.
I move that we do not allow the density of 18 acres 18 units per acre if half of the dwellings were to burn down or be destructed.
Okay.
So a motion to reject the requested waiver to permit
Reject
density in
the
excess of
request.
12 units per acre.
Correct.
So a yes will not grant the allowance, the variance, I'm sorry.
That's
Yes, we'll
correct.
reject.
Okay. Questions called? Let's go ahead and take a roll call on that.
Yes means what?
Yes means
You're rejecting it.
we would reject that variance.
Katz,
Yes.
Kroll,
Yes.
Neer,
No.
Ruling,
Yes.
Castro,
No.
Atherton,
No.
Chair Welsh.
Yes.
3 yes, 4 no.
Oh, 4 yes
Oh,
to reject the,
who did I miss? Oh, there we go, sorry. 4 yes, 3 no.
okay.
I understand.
Now, having taken that vote, I guess I suggested previously that these other items are moot. Do we want to,
Now, don't we need to do a vote on the actual zoning?
Yeah, I would suggest that at this point, you probably want to have a motion as to whether or not you recommend the requested rezoning as a whole. There are, I would offer 2 other suggestions with regard to that motion.
go ahead.
One is that there has been a significant amount of helpful discussion tonight that I think is relevant and germane to findings of fact that this plan commission would adopt and that are not included in the staff backup, but I think should be in any final document that the plan commission adopts. So your options relative to that would be to either approve findings of fact at a later date or to authorize the chair to sign findings of fact consistent with the discussion tonight. Second, the rezoning consideration will ultimately come before city council. And if you believe that the individual discussion items contained in the backup have merit, you may address them either in your motion or by a second motion that you would encourage the council to accept or reject any or all of those. But I think feedback on those may be helpful to the city council.
So, that goes back to my question, and I think I hear your answer, is it would be appropriate to have a motion for items 3 through 7, including in our motion, that we found 3 through 7 to be acceptable if ultimately people find number 1 to be acceptable on the council level.
I think
Or
what
have we already demonstrated that by
I
our-
think relative to 2 through 7,
Yes.
the findings of fact would reflect the discussion and the consensus of the plan commission on those
Okay.
items.
Okay, all right. So the motion, so you're suggesting that we can vote for me to sign the finding of facts, or Chris in my stead if necessary, would be one way to accomplish that. What was the other way?
The other way would be to bring them back to a future plan commission meeting for approval. Or for
And maybe that
consideration.
would be after the council took,
No,
No,
it
before.
would necessarily be before the council.
Okay. What would people like to do?
I'd kind of like to see them myself before sending them on to city council. I don't know how the rest of the commission feels.
I agree.
So then I guess what I would suggest is a motion, either thumbs up or thumbs down on the overall zoning, with direction to staff to prepare findings of fact consistent with your discussion and return those to you at your next meeting.
Do I hear so moved?
And the overall zoning request is from multifamily residential to PDR, correct?
With the.
PUD, sorry.
Yes. With the 7 requested waivers.
So if we are voting, if we vote in favor of the overall zoning, then we are voting in favor of those 7 individual items.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Did we actually take a vote on 2?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
It was approved.
Check.
The only one you did not take a vote on is 6.
Really?
It was pending if the PUD is fulfilled.
Yeah, we just anticipated that
It becomes moot.
yeah. Okay, so I need a motion to bring that back to our next meeting for our perusal. And those would be sent, well, that would be in the backup, and everybody could go over those in advance.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Do I have such a motion?
Move to bring the findings of fact back to our next meeting, which is May 13th. Is that a correct motion?
I think so.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of bringing the findings of fact back on the 13th of May, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Anything more you need on that?
I'm not sure if the plan commission is inclined to have the big thumbs up, thumbs down vote on the rezoning itself. The
That's
vote
what I'm
on the lot
confused on as
size
well.
kind of predicts what that vote would be, and we can base the findings of fact off of that.
I believe that that's true, but I'm more than willing to have a final vote in that regard if people desire that.
So is what you're saying is that a motion would be to approve the zoning change based contingent upon the findings of fact at the May 13th meeting?
Yeah, so I think
With
it would be
the-
a best practice if the plan commission has a vote where you say, we vote to recommend approval, or we vote to recommend denial of the requested rezoning from MFR to PDR. You can either do that now, or you can do that after you review the findings of fact, but I would encourage you to have that vote. As I said, I think the outcome of that vote can be predicted from your discussion on the density issue, but I think that is a vote that should be recorded in the record.
Do I hear someone that would like us to do that vote this evening? Sounds like next meeting.
I
Oh,
will-
wait a minute. Did-
I move that we approve the request to rezone the property at 722 North Annie Glidden Road, known as University Village Plaza. And that it be rezoned from multifamily residential to planned development residential.
At 12 units per acre.
I'm sorry.
At 12 or 18 or, I mean,
Oh, at 722 North Annie Glidden Road?
no, I think really what we're looking for is an up or down vote on, and maybe you're headed that direction.
Yeah, I'm just making a positive
Okay.
statement.
And I'm saying you don't have to make it positive. It is, you know,
Right.
if we want to.
However, it gets confusing when
Well, and
people...
if you're saying, and you can, you know, that motion,
Yes.
then anybody that said no to one side is gonna say yes to the other side, and they can say, well, I voted for that, or whatever. I would suggest that we stay consistent in, if you aren't for the lot size and the total, which I guess is what I was hearing, then we stay consistent in the guys who said yes unless they want to change their mind in this vote.
Well, in that case, I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, okay. So I'm back to, do we have a motion, or, and I'm not against you making a motion,
Okay.
as much as I think the consistency in application of who's voting for and who's voting against. Let's go ahead and wait 2 weeks, that's fine. But I appreciate the insight into that.
I am too.
What's that?
Confusion on how to make the motion.
Yeah, because he started making the motion, you stopped him, I don't know if he was done or not. And there's confusion.
Okay.
So there,
So, you're saying if we voted
Commissioner
no for
ruling,
one
right.
piece, then we should vote
Commissioner
this way or
Ruling
that way?
started to make a motion and after some discussion withdrew the motion. My suggestion to you, for purposes of clarity, is to not concern yourself with stating a motion in the affirmative. It is to express a motion that is what your intention is. So if you believe that the rezoning should be approved, you would, I move to approve the rezoning from MFR2 to PDR for University Village development with the waivers as stated. If you don't wish to have that recommendation go to council, you would say, I move to recommend denial of the request to rezone the property from MFR to PDR2. And I think that establishes a clear record
Gotcha.
and a clear direction from the Planning and Zoning Commission as far as what
And
your
s-
recommendation to council is.
Not meaning to interrupt you, but, so then Chair Welsh, what his point was making was that if you voted yes for number one, you're in the affirmative for changing the zoning.
It would seem as though
And
if you voted,
no, or am I getting it backwards?
it would seem as though the motion on number one was a negative motion.
Right.
The motion was to reject the request to go from 12 to 18. It would seem as though if that was the motion that you wanted to pass, then you would make a motion to reject the request to go from MFR to PDR.
That was my point. It's possible to do either. I just didn't want to confuse people with.
It was more confusing, I think, the way you were trying to describe it. Sorry.
I continue to be willing to hear a motion or to move to the next item on the agenda.
Do we need to make a motion to extend the vote to the next meeting if we don't do a vote tonight?
The public hearing has been closed, and we're going to return with, you already made a motion to return with findings of fact at the next
And
meeting.
so that covers it.
So you could adopt the findings of fact on a final vote at that meeting.
Thank you.
Does that inhibit the movement of progress through the council level? It would be my only question.
I would anticipate that we would be returning to council after your next Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
Okay? So that meets my constitutional needs here. All right, having not extended the meeting, we will have no considerations, have no future considerations. Our next meeting is on the 13th of May, correct? And I seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say, same sign.